My name is Alpha Thompson, and I am 67 years old. I retired from teaching 5 years ago and have been living in my beautiful Victorian house in Connecticut for over 30 years. My son Jackson moved back home after college while finding himself, and has been living rent-free for 3 years now. Nothing prepared me for the shock of overhearing him tell his new girlfriend that I was just the maid when introducing me. Before I continue with my story, I would love to know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear more stories about standing up for yourself when family takes advantage. I became a widow when Jackson was only 10 years old. My husband Thomas died suddenly from a heart attack, leaving me to raise our only child alone. We had a modest life insurance policy that helped us through the first couple of years, but it was nowhere near enough for the long term. I had been working part-time as an elementary school teacher, but after Thomas died, I took on a full-time position and picked up tutoring on weekends to make ends meet. Every decision I made was with Jackson in mind. I turned down a promotion that would have required more travel because I wanted to be home for him every evening. I put money aside each month for his college fund, often skipping meals or putting off buying new clothes for myself. I remember wearing the same winter coat for 15 years because college tuition kept increasing, and I was determined that my son would graduate debt-free. Jackson was such a sweet child back then. He would leave little thank you notes in my lunch bag or help around the house without being asked. I remember coming home exhausted after a long day of teaching, followed by 3 hours of tutoring to find that he had attempted to make dinner. It was just spaghetti with jarred sauce, and the kitchen was a disaster, but that 10-year-old boy wanted to help his mom. Those memories make what happened later even harder to understand. After high school, Jackson went to a good state university where he studied business. He called home regularly during his freshman year, often asking for advice or just to chat about his classes. By senior year, those calls became less frequent, usually happening only when he needed money for something. Still, I was proud when he graduated with honors. When Jackson asked if he could move back home temporarily after graduation, while he found himself and built his personal brand, I was thrilled. My house had felt empty with just me rattling around in it. The idea of having my son back brightened my outlook considerably. I cleaned out his old bedroom, bought new sheets, and stocked the fridge with all his favorites. The first few weeks were lovely. We caught up over dinners, watched movies together, and fell into a comfortable routine. But gradually, things began to change. Jackson would sleep until noon, leave his dishes in the sink, and expect freshly laundered clothes to appear in his drawers as if by magic. When I gently suggested he might want to help with household chores, he looked genuinely surprised. "Mom, I am focusing on my career development right now. These networking events and online courses are crucial for my future," he explained, as if teaching full-time and maintaining a household required no effort on my part. The Victorian house we live in has been in my family for generations. My parents left it to me when they passed, and the mortgage was paid off decades ago. It is my greatest financial asset and my pride and joy. The wraparound porch with its ornate spindles, the stained glass window on the landing, the original hardwood floors. I painstakingly restored myself during summer breaks from teaching all these elements, make it uniquely mine. Yet somehow within 6 months of moving back in, Jackson had taken over the living room as his office, rearranged the furniture without asking, and started referring to the guest bedroom as his creative space. He invited friends over for barbecues in the backyard without telling me until they were pulling into the driveway. He would introduce me to these friends almost as an afterthought, as if I were a roommate he was stuck with rather than the homeowner. I tried to tell myself this was normal for his generation, that the pandemic and difficult job market had created unique challenges for young adults, that he just needed time to find his footing in the world. But deep down, I knew what was happening. My once considerate son had grown into an entitled adult who saw my home as his and my time as an infinite resource existing solely to make his life easier. Still, I loved him fiercely. He was my only child, my last connection to Thomas, and despite everything I saw, glimpses of the sweet boy he had once been. Like when he brought me soup when I had the flu or remembered to buy my favorite chocolates on my birthday. Those moments kept me hoping that my real son was still in there somewhere beneath the layers of entitlement. For nearly 3 years, we continued in this uncomfortable pattern. I tried setting boundaries in small ways, reminding him that the electric bill had gone up since he started mining cryptocurrency, suggesting he contribute to groceries, but my attempts were met with either promises that were quickly forgotten or deflection about how hard he was working on his business ventures, none of which seemed to generate actual income. When Jackson mentioned he had been seeing someone new, a woman named Sophia who worked at a marketing firm downtown, I was cautiously optimistic. Perhaps a relationship with a professional woman would help him mature. He spoke about her constantly for weeks before suggesting she come over for dinner. The way his eyes lit up when he talked about her reminded me of how Thomas used to look at me. Despite everything, I wanted my son to find the same happiness his father and I had shared. "She is amazing, Mom," he gushed. "Super smart, ambitious, comes from a good family. Her father is some big-shot investment banker in New York." I noticed how he emphasized her family connections and wondered if that was part of her appeal for him. Nevertheless, I was eager to meet the woman who had captured my son's attention so completely. Little did I know that this dinner would become a turning point in our relationship, forcing me to confront truths I had been avoiding for far too long. I spent the entire day preparing for Sophia's first visit. I wanted everything to be perfect, not just for Jackson's sake, but because I genuinely wanted to make a good impression on this woman, who might someday become part of our family. I dusted the antique display cabinet that had belonged to my grandmother, polished the silver serving pieces I rarely used, and put fresh flowers on the dining room table. For dinner, I prepared my special roast chicken with rosemary and lemon-scalloped potatoes from scratch and fresh asparagus. I even baked an apple pie using the recipe that had won me first place at the county fair 3 years running before I retired. The house smelled wonderful, and I felt a flutter of excitement as I changed into a nice blouse and slacks, adding a touch of lipstick and my favorite pearl earrings that Thomas had given me on our 15th anniversary. "This is too much," Mom, Jackson said when he came downstairs and saw the dining room. He had the grace to look a little embarrassed. "We could have just ordered pizza." "Nonsense," I replied. "I want to make Sophia feel welcome." Jackson checked his watch. "She will be here any minute. And Mom, try not to ask too many personal questions, okay? Sophia is pretty private." Before I could respond to this unexpected warning, the doorbell rang. Jackson practically ran to answer it. From the moment she stepped into my home, I could tell Sophia was from a different world than ours. She wore a sleek black dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension, with red-soled shoes I recognized as the expensive brand my wealthier teacher friends used to covet. Her dark hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, not a strand out of place, and her makeup looked professionally done. She was strikingly beautiful, but there was something cool and assessing in her gaze as she handed Jackson a bottle of wine that I later noticed cost over $100. "This place is quaint," she said, looking around my lovingly maintained home in a way that made the word sound less than complimentary. "Thanks for coming," Jackson said, kissing her cheek. "Let me show you around before dinner." I smiled and extended my hand. "I am Alpha. It is so nice to finally meet you, Sophia. Jackson has told me wonderful things." She shook my hand briefly, her grip limp and disinterested. "Charmed," she said, then immediately turned back to Jackson. "Yes, show me around. The outside is so interesting. Victorian, right?" They walked away before I could respond, Jackson's hand on the small of her back as he guided her toward the living room. I returned to the kitchen to check on dinner, telling myself not to read too much into her cool reception. First meetings could be awkward, and she was probably just nervous. I was bending down to check the pie in the oven when I heard them approaching the kitchen. I was about to stand up and greet them properly when Sophia's voice drifted in. "So, who exactly was that woman by the door? An aunt or something?" There was a pause, and I remained frozen, half bent over the oven, waiting for my son's response. "Oh," Jackson said with a dismissive laugh that made my heart constrict painfully. "Do not mind her. She is just the maid." The heat from the open oven washed over me, but I felt suddenly cold all over. "Just the maid," I straightened slowly, the pie forgotten, as my son's words echoed in my head. "You have household staff. You never mentioned that." Sophia sounded impressed. "Well, you know," Jackson replied vaguely, "she has been with the family forever. Practically raised me." I closed the oven door as quietly as I could, my hands trembling. He had not even bothered to correct her assumption that I was staff. Worse, he had implied this was his family home, erasing me as his mother entirely. "Dinner is ready," I called out, amazed that my voice sounded almost normal, despite the lump in my throat. "We can eat whenever you are ready." When they entered the kitchen, I busied myself with serving the food, unable to look directly at my son. How could he say such a thing? How could he deny me our relationship, our history, everything we had been through together? The dinner that I had spent all day preparing became an exercise in restraint. I served the food I had cooked with love, poured the expensive wine Sophia had brought, and tried to make conversation while feeling like an intruder in my own home. "This house has such potential," Sophia said, looking around the kitchen with its 1,990 seconds renovation that I had saved for years to afford. "The bones are good, but it could really use some updating. Those cabinets are so dated." "I have been thinking the same thing," Jackson replied, as if he had any right to renovate my kitchen. "The whole place needs modernizing." "It must have been gorgeous in its heyday," Sophia continued, speaking about my well-maintained home as if it were a decaying relic. "These old family estates are such treasures even when they need work." "It has been in the family for generations," Jackson said, proudly neglecting to mention which family. "I have lots of plans for it." I focused on cutting my chicken into perfectly even pieces, not trusting myself to respond. Each bite tasted like ash in my mouth. "Do you have siblings, Jackson?" Sophia asked. "Who else stands to inherit pieces of the estate?" Jackson glanced at me briefly before replying, "No, it is just me." At least he had not lied about being an only child. Small comfort. When Sophia asked me to bring more water, addressing me as Miss rather than by name, I complied without correction, still too stunned by my son's betrayal to assert myself. Jackson smirked slightly, as if my compliance confirmed my servant status. "The pie is homemade," I said quietly when I brought out dessert. "Family recipe." "How lovely that you bake," Sophia said with the condescending tone one might use with a child. "My housekeeper tries, but her pastries are never quite right. European training makes such a difference." I excused myself before they finished dessert, claiming a headache that was not entirely fabricated. In the sanctuary of my bedroom, I finally allowed the tears to come. I sat on the edge of my bed, the same bed I had shared with Thomas, where I had nursed Jackson through childhood fevers, where I had graded countless papers, while my son slept down the hall. Just the maid. The words played on repeat in my mind. Was that all I was to him now? The woman who cooked and cleaned, had he so completely forgotten the nights I sat up with him? After nightmares, the school projects. I helped him complete the thousands of meals I had prepared, the sacrifices, large and small, that made up the tapestry of motherhood. I looked at myself in the mirror of my vanity. At 67, I still had good posture from years of standing before classrooms. My hair had gone silver, but it framed a face that, while lined with experience, reflected the dignity I had always tried to model for my students and my son. The pearl earrings Thomas had given me caught the light, reminding me of a time when I was treasured as a wife, respected as a mother. "You are not just a maid," I whispered to my reflection. "You are Alpha Thompson. You raised a child alone. You educated hundreds of students. You kept this house and made it a home." But as I heard laughter floating up from downstairs, my son's voice animated in a way it rarely was when speaking just to me. I wondered if I had failed in the most important task of parenthood, raising a child who understood the value of respect and gratitude. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake, replaying not just the evening's humiliation but the gradual transformation of my relationship with Jackson. When had it all changed? When had I become invisible to him, except as someone who provided services? My mind drifted back to the day of Thomas's funeral. 10-year-old Jackson, solemn in his first suit, holding my hand so tightly it hurt. "It is okay, Mom," he had whispered as we stood before the casket. "I will take care of you now." The memory made fresh tears spring to my eyes. That little boy had understood responsibility and love in a way that the adult Jackson seemed to have forgotten. I remembered the Christmas when Jackson was 14 and money was particularly tight. I had managed to get him the video game system he wanted by picking up extra tutoring sessions for months, but there was nothing left for him to get me a gift. I found a handmade card under the tree, inside which he had written, "I owe you 1 month of dishes. Merry Christmas to the best mom ever. Thanks for everything you do." He had kept that promise, faithfully washing dishes every night without complaint. What had happened to that thoughtful teenager? There was the time in his sophomore year of high school when I came down with pneumonia. Jackson had called my sister to come help arrange rides to school with neighbors and sat beside my bed reading aloud from my favorite mystery novels. "You always take care of everyone else, Mom," he had said. "Let someone take care of you for once." Countless other moments flickered through my mind, like scenes from a home movie. Jackson proudly presenting me with his college acceptance letter, telling me it was all because of my support. The way he had hugged me at his graduation, whispering, "We did it, Mom." The weekend he drove 4 hours to help me after I sprained my ankle gardening, insisting on staying until I could manage the stairs comfortably again. When had that considerate young man disappeared? Had college changed him so fundamentally? Or had those seeds of entitlement always been there, and I had been too blinded by maternal love to notice them sprouting? Dawn was breaking when I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. I was awakened 2 hours later by the sound of voices and clattering dishes downstairs. I put on my robe and made my way to the kitchen, where I found Jackson and Sophia helping themselves to coffee and the muffins I had baked earlier in the week. "Morning," Jackson said casually, as if the previous night's conversation had never happened. "We are going to head out for brunch with some friends in a bit." "Good morning," I replied, forcing myself to sound normal. "There is more coffee in the pot if you need it." "This is fine," Sophia said, not bothering to look up from her phone, though a bit strong for my taste. I stood awkwardly in my own kitchen, feeling like an intruder. Jackson and Sophia spoke to each other as if I wasn't there discussing weekend plans that apparently involved more time at Jackson's house. "So I was thinking," Jackson said, as they prepared to leave. "Sophia's lease is up next month, and rather than renewing it, she might just move in here. There is plenty of space, and it makes more sense financially." I stared at him in disbelief. He hadn't even framed it as a question, just an announcement about someone moving into my home. "I would need to think about that," I managed to say. Jackson looked surprised, as if the possibility of me having an opinion hadn't occurred to him. "What is there to think about? The guest room is just sitting empty most of the time." "It is my house, Jackson. Having another permanent resident is a big decision." Sophia glanced between us, a slight frown creasing her perfect forehead. "I thought this was your family home, Jackson." "It is," he said quickly. "Mom is just being funny. Of course you can move in." Before I could respond, he continued, "Actually, could you get an extra set of house keys made today? Sophia will need her own set." They left soon after, Jackson promising to be back for dinner, but not to wait up if they were late. I stood in the silent kitchen, my untouched coffee growing cold, as I tried to process what had just happened. Not only had my son misrepresented his living situation to his girlfriend, but he was now planning to move her into my home without so much as a proper discussion. I needed advice. I called my sister Marilyn, who had always been my rock through difficult times. He said what Marilyn exclaimed when I recounted Jackson's "just the maid" comment. "Alpha, that is absolutely unacceptable. Thomas would be rolling in his grave." "I know," I sighed. "I just do not understand how we got here. Where did I go wrong with him?" "Stop that right now," Marilyn said firmly. "You were an exceptional mother. Jackson is a grown man making his own choices, and right now he is choosing to be a disrespectful, entitled jerk. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "What can I do? He is my son. I cannot just throw him out." "Why not?" Marilyn challenged. "He is 34 years old, college educated, perfectly capable of supporting himself. You are enabling this behavior by allowing it to continue." Her words stung because I knew they contained truth. I had been making excuses for Jackson's behavior for years, telling myself he just needed time to launch properly into adulthood. But 3 years of rent-free living with full maid service was beyond reasonable support. "I am not saying cut him off completely," Marilyn continued more gently. "I am saying it is time to establish some boundaries. Real ones with consequences. You deserve respect, Alpha. Being his mother does not mean being his doormat." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad thinking about boundaries. What did I actually want? What was I willing to accept? The more I thought about it, the clearer it became that things could not continue as they were. If Jackson wanted to live in my house as an adult, he needed to contribute both financially and to the running of the household. If he wanted to have his girlfriend live here too, That would require additional contribution and adherence to house rules that we would establish together. Most importantly, he needed to treat me with the basic respect due to another human being, let alone his mother. But how to make this clear to a son who had introduced me as the maid to impress his girlfriend? A son who clearly saw my home as his inheritance to do with, as he pleased, even while I was very much alive and living in it. The deed to the house was in my filing cabinet. I retrieved it, looking at my name clearly listed as the sole owner. I also found the property tax statements, insurance documents, and utility bills all in my name. Physical proof of what should have been obvious: this was my house earned through years of responsible ownership. An idea began to form in my mind. If Jackson saw me as staff rather than family, perhaps it was time to clarify our actual legal relationship. Not as mother and son, but as landlord and tenant. I spent the afternoon researching tenant laws in Connecticut and drawing up a simple but formal rental agreement. I calculated fair market rent for a bedroom, and shared spaces in our neighborhood added reasonable fees for utilities, internet, and food if he wanted to continue eating meals I prepared. I established clear terms about guests, noise levels, and shared responsibilities. I knew this would likely trigger a significant confrontation. Jackson had been living expense-free for so long that any change would feel like an attack. But Marilyn was right. I deserved respect. I deserved to be acknowledged as the owner of my own home and the mother who had sacrificed so much for her son. That evening, Jackson texted to say he would not be home for dinner after all. Sophia's friends had invited them to a gallery opening and they might stay in the city overnight. I responded with a simple, "Okay," but added something I had never written to him before: "We need to talk tomorrow, it is important." His response came hours later: "Sure, whatever you want." I slept better that night, the beginnings of a plan giving me a sense of control I had not felt in years. The next day would likely be difficult but necessary. It was time for Jackson to see me, not as the maid but as who I truly was. A woman worthy of respect, the owner of this house, and a mother who loved her son enough to finally set some firm boundaries. The week following the Just the Maid incident was eye-opening. Now that I was paying closer attention instead of making excuses, I could see just how completely Jackson had come to view me as household staff rather than family. It was as if acknowledging the pattern allowed me to finally see its full extent, and what I saw broke my heart anew each day. Jackson and Sophia returned late Sunday, breezing into the house without so much as a greeting. I was reading in the living room when they entered, but they walked past as if I were invisible, laughing about some private joke. Later, I found their weekend bags dumped in the hallway, apparently for me to deal with. When I gently pointed out to Jackson that they should put their things away, he looked genuinely surprised. "Oh, I thought you would get to it eventually," he said with a shrug. "You usually do." I did usually handle his laundry, a habit that had begun when he first moved back home, and I was still thrilled to have him there. What had started as an act of maternal love had somehow transformed into an expected service. On Monday morning, I came downstairs to find the kitchen in disarray. Dishes piled in the sink, a half-empty wine bottle on the counter, crumbs and food scraps scattered across my usually spotless countertops. A note was taped to the refrigerator. "Mom, we are out of that granola I like. Please pick some up today. Also, Sophia prefers almond milk to regular." No, please, no thank you. Just instructions, as if I were composing a shopping list for my employer. I left the mess exactly as it was, and went about my day curious to see what would happen. When I returned from my book club that afternoon, Jackson was in the kitchen staring at the unwashed dishes with annoyance. "You did not clean up," he said accusingly. "No, I did not," I replied calmly. "I did not make the mess." He rolled his eyes. "I had a work call this morning. I did not have time to deal with this." "Neither did I said. "I had book club." He muttered something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like, "That is hardly the same thing," before grudgingly loading a few dishes into the dishwasher. He left most of the work undone, apparently expecting me to finish it. I did not. Tuesday brought a new level of presumption. I returned from grocery shopping to find Sophia arranging flowers in my living room while Jackson set up a small bar area. "Oh, good you are back," Jackson said when he saw me struggling with the shopping bags. He made no move to help. "We are having a few people over tonight. Nothing major, just some networking contacts of Sophia's." "I wish you had asked me first," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. I had planned a quiet evening. You can still have one, Sophia interjected smoothly. We will be in the main areas. You can just stay in your room if our noise bothers you. My room. As if I were a boarder in my own house, expected to remain out of sight when the real residents entertained. Actually, I said, finding my voice, I think I will join you. I would like to meet Jackson's business contacts. They exchanged a look I could not quite interpret. Sure, Mom, Jackson said after a pause. Whatever you want. That evening I dressed carefully in a flattering blue dress I had worn to faculty. Dinners applied light makeup and joined the gathering in my living room. There were about 10 people, all in their 30s, dressed in expensive casual clothing and talking loudly about startups and investment opportunities. Jackson looked uncomfortable when I appeared, but introduced me with a vague, "This is Alpha, she helps around the house." Not his mother, not the homeowner, someone who helps around the house. One of the men, slightly older than the others, tried to engage me in conversation, asking how long I had worked for Jackson. Before I could correct his assumption, Jackson interjected. "Alpha has been with us forever," he said smoothly. "Practically family at this point. Alpha, could you check if we have more ice? We are running low." I stood there for a moment, torn between creating a scene and maintaining dignity. I opted for the latter, but as I walked to the kitchen, I heard Sophia saying, "Good help is so hard to find these days. You are lucky to have someone so loyal." Wednesday brought a basket of laundry outside my door, expensive-looking blouses and lingerie, with a note in unfamiliar handwriting. "These need to be hand-washed. Thank you." It was signed with a looping S and a smiley face, as if the demand would be less presumptuous if accompanied by cheerful punctuation. I left the basket untouched. That afternoon I encountered Sophia in my bathroom, using my special face cream that I ordered from a small company in Vermont at considerable expense. "Oh," she said, not sounding particularly apologetic, "I ran out of moisturizer." "You do not mind, right?" Jackson said you would be fine with it. "Actually, I do mind," I said quietly. "That cream is quite expensive and specially formulated for my skin type." She screwed the cap back on with a slight eye roll. "Sorry. No need to be so sensitive about it. I will get Jackson to order you another one." As if my son would be replacing my cosmetics, as if he were the provider in this scenario. When I tried to speak with Jackson about these boundary violations later that day, he brushed me off. "Sophia is still adjusting to being here, Mom. She comes from a different background where they had actual staff. Cut her some slack." "This is not about her background," I replied. "This is about basic courtesy and respect." "You are overreacting," he said dismissively. "Look, I have a Zoom call in 5 minutes. We can talk about your feelings another time." My feelings. As if my desire to be treated with dignity in my own home was just an emotional overreaction. Thursday morning, I found renovation plans spread across the kitchen table, detailed sketches for updating the kitchen and master bathroom. My master bathroom. There were fabric swatches and paint samples, alongside printouts of modern fixtures that would look completely out of place in my Victorian home. "What is all this?" I asked when Jackson came downstairs. "Just some ideas Sophia and her friend, who is an interior designer, came up with," he said casually. "This place could really use an update, Mom. Those bathrooms are straight out of the 90s. "I like my bathroom as it is," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "And I have no plans to renovate the kitchen." "Well, you should think about it," he replied, as if I needed his permission to make decisions about my own home. "Sophia has great taste, and it would increase the property value." "The property is not for sale," I reminded him. He shrugged. "Not now, but eventually. Might as well make improvements that we can enjoy now and will pay off later." We, as if this house and its future were already joint property. That night I overheard Jackson and Sophia talking in the living room after they thought I had gone to bed. I had come downstairs for a glass of water and paused in the hallway when I heard my name. "Alpha seemed upset about the renovation plans," Sophia was saying. "Is she always this resistant to change?" "She is just old school," Jackson replied. "Does not understand that updating the property is an investment. She thinks because she has lived here forever that she knows best." "What about the smaller bedroom upstairs? The one with all those books and that old desk that would make a perfect home gym once we figure out what to do with all that stuff." "You mean Mom's office?" Jackson asked with a laugh. Yeah, we could clear that out. She never uses it anyway, just stores a bunch of old teaching materials and photo albums in there. My office. The room where I had prepared lessons for 3 decades, where I kept the photos and mementos of my life with Thomas, where I wrote letters and paid bills, and existed as myself rather than as Jackson's mother or housekeeper. They were planning to clear it out without even consulting me. Once we figure out what to do with Mom, the phrase echoed in my head as I silently returned upstairs, water forgotten. I was a problem to be solved, an inconvenient presence in what they already considered their house. That was the moment I knew I could no longer delay the conversation I had been planning. This was not just about disrespect anymore. This was about my son and his girlfriend actively planning to take over my home and reduce my presence in it, as if I were an aging relative to be managed rather than the homeowner and family matriarch. The rental agreement I had drafted earlier in the week sat in my desk drawer. Tomorrow, I decided, would be the day I reclaimed my house and my dignity. It was time for Jackson to understand exactly who owned this home and what his actual position in it was. Not the heir apparent, not the de facto owner, but a guest who had long overstayed his welcome. I woke up Friday morning with a sense of purpose I had not felt in years. Today would be the day I reclaimed my house and my dignity. I dressed with care, choosing a tailored navy pantsuit I had worn for parent-teacher conferences when I wanted to project authority. I styled my silver hair in a neat bob, applied subtle makeup, and added a pair of reading glasses on a chain around my neck for the full effect. Looking in the mirror, I saw not just Alpha the mother, but Alpha the homeowner, Alpha the professional Alpha, the woman who had managed her affairs successfully for decades. Before Jackson or Sophia stirred, I visited a locksmith downtown and had 2 copies made of a new key for the front door. I would be changing the locks this weekend, a precaution my sister Marilyn had suggested in case things went poorly. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst, she had advised, and it seemed prudent. My next stop was the office of Gerald Weber, an attorney who had been a friend since our children attended the same elementary school. I had called ahead and explained my situation in broad strokes. Now, sitting in his wood-paneled office, I laid out the full story. "So let me get this straight," Gerald said, leaning back in his chair. "Your adult son has been living in your home rent-free for 3 years. Recently told his girlfriend you were the maid rather than his mother and the homeowner, and now they are making plans to renovate your house and convert your office into London. A gym without your permission." "That sums it up," I confirmed. Gerald removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Alpha, I have known you for 25 years. You are one of the most patient, generous people I have ever met. But this situation is beyond generous. It is being taken advantage of." "I know that now," I said quietly. "I just need to be sure that legally I am on solid ground." "More than solid," Gerald assured me. "The house is solely in your name. Jackson has established residency by living there, so you cannot change the locks and bar entry without proper notice. But you can absolutely establish formal rental terms or require him to leave with appropriate notice." Gerald helped me refine the rental agreement I had drafted, ensuring it was legally sound while still being fair. We also prepared a formal eviction notice with a generous 60-day window to be used only if Jackson refused the rental terms. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Gerald asked as his assistant made copies of the documents. "It could permanently affect your relationship with your son." "Our relationship is already damaged," I replied. "He does not see me as his mother anymore, just the help. Perhaps this will be a wake-up call he needs." "Well," Gerald said, handing me a folder with all the paperwork for what it is worth, "I think Thomas would be proud of you for standing up for yourself. He never did tolerate disrespect." I left Gerald's office feeling both anxious and empowered. I had spent the past 3 years trying to be understanding, making excuses, hoping Jackson would mature on his own. That approach had failed spectacularly. Now it was time for a different strategy. At home, I cleaned the house top to bottom, not because I was the maid, but because I wanted the confrontation to take place in a space that reflected my standards and care. I wanted Jackson and Sophia to be absolutely clear about whose home they were in. Jackson texted me mid-afternoon, "Sophia and I are having drinks with her colleagues. I will swing by to pick her up around 7, then we are heading out for the evening." Perfect. Sophia would be alone in the house briefly when she returned from work before Jackson arrived to collect her. That would give me the opportunity I needed to speak with her one-on-one. At 6:30, I heard the front door open. I was sitting in the living room, the folder of legal documents on the coffee table before me, looking every inch the professional landlord rather than the doting mother or household staff. Sophia entered engrossed in her phone and startled slightly when she noticed me. "Oh, you are sitting in the dark." She reached for the light switch. "The lamps are on," I replied calmly. "I was waiting for you, actually. Could we talk for a moment?" She glanced at her watch. "Jackson will be here soon to pick me up. I need to change." "This will not take long," I said, gesturing to the armchair across from me. "Please sit down." Something in my tone must have registered because she hesitated, then perched cautiously on the edge of the chair. "Is everything okay?" "Welcome to my house," I said clearly. "I do not believe we have been properly introduced. I am Alpha Thompson, the owner and landlord of this property." Confusion flashed across her face. "I know who you are," she said cautiously. "Do you?" I asked, opening the folder and removing the deed to the house. "Because there seems to be some confusion about my role here. I am not the maid Sophia. I am not the housekeeper. I am the owner of this house and Jackson is my son." Her face paled slightly. I know you are Jackson's mother," he told me. "Did he?" "Because last week he introduced me to you as just the maid. Those were his exact words." "There must be some misunderstanding," she said, but her eyes darted away, confirming she remembered the moment. "There is indeed a misunderstanding," I agreed, sliding the deed across the coffee table. "Please take a look. You will see that this house is solely in my name. I inherited it from my parents and have maintained it for 30 years. Every bill, every repair, every property tax payment has been made by me." She glanced at the document, her composure visibly shaken. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you and Jackson have been making plans for my house, renovating my kitchen, converting my office into a gym, as if you owned it. You left laundry outside my door as if I were staff. You used my personal skincare products without permission. You invited guests without consulting me, all while living here rent-free." She had the grace to look embarrassed. "Jackson said this was his family home, that he grew up here. That part is true. What he failed to mention is that he has no ownership stake in it and that he has been living here as my guest, not the other way around." I removed the rental agreement from the folder. "This is a formal rental agreement. If Jackson wishes to continue living here, he will need to sign it and begin paying rent at fair market value. If you wish to move in as well, there will be additional rent and clearly defined house rules. I have detailed them all here." Her eyes widened as she scanned the monthly figure. This is a lot." "It is actually below market rate for this neighborhood," I said calmly. "I checked comparable properties, and considerably less than what you would pay for a house like this with a real maid." The front door opened again, and Jackson called out Sophia, ready to go. "We are in the living room," I called back. "Sophia and I are having an important conversation about housing arrangements." Jackson appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene before him, Sophia looking stunned, the legal documents on the table, my unusually formal attire. His face shifted from confusion to wariness. "What is going on?" he asked. "I was just explaining to Sophia that I am not in fact the maid," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I am the owner of this house, your mother, and it is time we clarified the terms of your living arrangement." Jackson's face flushed. "Mom, what are you doing? Why are you talking to Sophia about this?" "Because she deserves to know the truth about where she is considering living," I replied. "She deserves to know that this is my house, not yours, that you have no legal claim to it while I am alive, that you have been living here rent-free through my generosity, not because of any entitlement." "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "You are my mother. This is my family home." "Yes, I am your mother," I agreed, a fact you conveniently forgot when you introduced me as the maid. "And this is indeed your family home in the sense that you grew up here. But it is not your property, Jackson. It is mine." I held up the rental agreement. "If you wish to continue living here, these are the terms. Rent will be $800 per month plus contribution to utilities. You will be responsible for cleaning up after yourself, doing your own laundry, and treating me with the respect due to both your mother and your landlord." Jackson looked at the document as if it might bite him. "This is insane. I am not going to pay you to live in my own house." "It is not your house," I repeated firmly, "and you are 34 years old, college-educated, perfectly capable of supporting yourself. I have supported you for 3 additional years out of love, not obligation. That arrangement is now changing." Sophia stood up abruptly. "I think I should go. This seems like a family matter." "Please stay," I said. "Since you and Jackson have been discussing your moving in here, this concerns you too. You should know exactly what you would be agreeing to." Jackson turned to Sophia, his expression panicked. "She is just upset about something. Ignore all this. We can talk about it later." "No, we are talking about it now," I insisted. "For 3 years I have watched you take advantage of my generosity. I have cooked your meals, cleaned your messes, and paid all the bills while you contributed nothing but disrespect. That ends today." "You cannot be serious," Jackson said, his voice rising. "You would charge your own son rent." "Many parents do," I pointed out, "especially when their adult children have been living with them for years with no exit plan. This is not punishment, Jackson. This is reality." "Reality," he laughed bitterly. "The reality is that you are lonely and desperate to keep me here, so you have been playing the martyr, cooking and cleaning and then complaining about it." His words stung, but I kept my composure. If I wanted company, I could join any number of social groups for people my age. I do not need to be disrespected in my own home to avoid loneliness. Jackson turned to Sophia. "Can you believe this? My own mother trying to extort money from me?" Sophia looked uncomfortable. "Jackson, I think we should talk about this later when everyone is calmer." "There is nothing to talk about," he exploded. "This is my house too. I grew up here. I have rights." "You have the right to accept the rental terms or find somewhere else to live," I said quietly. "Those are your options." Jackson stared at me in disbelief, his face flushing deeper with anger. "You cannot be serious," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "After everything I have done for you—" "What exactly have you done for me, Jackson?" I asked, genuinely curious about what contributions he thought he had made. I have been here keeping you company, making sure you are not all alone in this big house. Do you know how many of your friends have kids who never visit? You should be grateful." I moved back. His answer was so revealing of his worldview that I almost felt sorry for him. In his mind, his mere presence was a gift to me, regardless of how he behaved. Being present is not a contribution when that presence creates more work expense and emotional strain, I explained calmly. "And if your goal was truly to keep me company, why do you spend so little time actually interacting with me? Why do you speak to me primarily to make requests or give instructions?" "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "Sophia, let us go. We do not need to listen to this." Sophia hesitated, glancing between us. To my surprise, she did not immediately move toward the door. "Actually," she said slowly, "I think Alpha deserves to be heard, and I have some questions." Jackson turned to her in shock. "What?" "You told me this was your house," Sophia said, her voice hardening slightly. "You said you inherited it from your grandparents and were letting your mother stay here because she had nowhere else to go." "That is not exactly what I said," Jackson backpedaled. "I said it was my family home, which it is." "No, you specifically said it would all be yours eventually anyway, so there was no reason to pay rent," Sophia insisted. "You said your mother was financially dependent on you." I could not help the small gasp that escaped me. The lies went beyond just calling me the maid. They were a complete inversion of our actual situation. "I have never been financially dependent on Jackson," I said firmly. "I have a teacher's pension, Social Security, and investments that provide me with a comfortable retirement income. I own this house outright. There is no mortgage. I pay all the utilities, buy all the groceries, and maintain the property entirely on my own." Sophia's expression hardened further. "What about the business you said you were running from home? The one you said was paying for our dinners out and my birthday jewelry?" Jackson shot her a warning look. "Sophia, this is not the time." "There is no business," I said, the pieces falling into place. "Jackson does not have a job. He has not had steady employment since moving back home 3 years ago." "He said he was an entrepreneur," Sophia pressed, "that he had investment income and consulting clients." "If he does, that is news to me," I replied. "To my knowledge, he has been living entirely on my generosity." "She is exaggerating," Jackson cut in desperately. I have projects and investments. They just have not fully matured yet. 3 years is a long maturation period, I observed. Jackson's face contorted with frustration. You know what? Fine. If you want to play hardball, we can play hardball. I will find my own place. Come on, Sophia, we are leaving. To go where exactly? Sophia asked, her voice cool. To your imaginary apartment. Or were you planning to move into my place, the one with the lease ending next month that you encouraged me not to renew? We will figure it out, Jackson snapped. Are you coming or not? Sophia looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head. No, I do not think I am. I need to process the fact that nearly everything you have told me about yourself appears to be a lie. So you are taking her side, Jackson demanded incredulously. This is not about sides, Sophia replied. This is about honesty. You told me you were a successful entrepreneur living in your own family home. In reality, you are unemployed and living with your mother rent-free while treating her like household staff. Those are not small discrepancies, Jackson. I cannot believe this, Jackson muttered. He turned to me, pointing an accusatory finger. You did this on purpose. You waited until she was here alone to ambush us with this. I waited until I could no longer tolerate being disrespected in my own home. I corrected him. The timing is irrelevant to the facts. Facts. The fact is, you are a lonely old woman who cannot stand the thought of me having a life separate from you. You have always been controlling, trying to make me feel guilty for living my life. His words were designed to wound, to make me question myself. A week ago they might have worked, but I had spent days examining our relationship, remembering the truth of our history together. I knew better now. Jackson, I said quietly, I encouraged you to go to college 4 hours away. I supported you taking a backpacking trip through Europe after graduation. I have never once asked you to limit your life for my sake. What I have asked for is basic respect and honesty. This is such bull, he spat. You know what? Keep your precious house. I do not need it, and I do not need you. I have options. I hope that is true, I said sincerely. I truly want you to succeed, Jackson. But that success needs to come from your own efforts, not from taking advantage of others. Whatever, he said dismissively. I will get my stuff tomorrow. Enjoy your empty house. He stormed toward the door, then turned back when he realized Sophia wasn't following. Are you serious? You are staying here with her? Sophia straightened her shoulders. I am not staying here, but I am not leaving with you either. I will call a rideshare. Jackson threw up his hands in frustration. Fine, great. You two deserve each other. He slammed the door behind him with enough force to rattle the stained glass panel above it. In the sudden silence, Sophia and I looked at each other awkwardly. I am sorry, she said finally. I had no idea about any of this. I believe you, I said. Jackson has become very skilled at creating his own reality. She glanced at the rental agreement still on the coffee table. Was that real? Would you really have let us stay if we paid rent? Yes, I said. Despite everything, I do love my son. I want him to succeed. But I realized that supporting him unconditionally was actually enabling his worst tendencies. Sometimes love means setting boundaries. Sophia nodded slowly. My parents were the opposite. Very strict, very demanding. Nothing was ever good enough. She gave a small, sad laugh. Maybe that is why Jackson and I connected. He told me what I wanted to hear, that success was easy, that we deserved luxury without effort. Succeeding takes work, I said gently. Whether it is in a career, a relationship, or just basic adulting. I know that now, she said. She took out her phone. I should call that ride. As she waited for her car, she turned to me once more. For what it is worth, your house is beautiful, not dated at all. It has character and warmth. I should have appreciated that instead of making those thoughtless comments. Thank you, I said, surprised by her apology. And I am truly sorry about the maid comment, she added. If I had known you were Jackson's mother, I never would have treated you that way. I nodded, accepting her apology, but noting that she still did not quite understand. No one should be treated with disrespect, whether they were family, staff, or strangers. After Sophia left, I sat alone in my quiet living room, emotionally drained, but strangely peaceful. For the first time in years, I had stood up for myself instead of prioritizing peace at any cost. It had been painful but also liberating. I did not hear from Jackson for 3 days. When he finally returned, his demeanor was still hostile but less volatile. He brought boxes and trash bags, moving efficiently through the house, collecting his belongings. "Where will you go?" I asked as he loaded his car. "A friend from college has a place downtown," he replied curtly. "He is letting me crash until I figure things out." "Jackson," I said, "I know you are angry, but I hope someday you will understand that this was not about punishing you. It was about respecting myself." He paused, a box in his arms. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the thoughtful young man he had once been. Then his expression hardened again. "Save the lecture," he said. "I will text you my new address for mail." With that, he drove away, leaving me truly alone in my home for the first time in 3 years. I felt a complex mixture of emotions, grief for the relationship we had lost, worry about his future, but also an undeniable sense of relief. My house was my own again. I could exist in it without walking on eggshells, without being treated as an inconvenience in spaces I had lovingly maintained for decades. That night, I moved my desk back to where I preferred it, reclaimed the guest bathroom Jackson had taken over, and slept soundly for the first time in weeks. The first month after Jackson moved out was eerily quiet. I found myself listening for footsteps that never came automatically, cooking too much food, and catching myself about to call out when I heard a noise outside. My house felt both emptier and more spacious, a paradox that took time to reconcile. I missed my son, of course. Despite everything, he was still the baby I had cradled, the child I had raised, the young man I had been so proud of. But I did not miss the tension, the constant feeling of being devalued in my own home, the emotional labor of pretending his behavior was acceptable. Jackson and I communicated sparingly, primarily through text messages about mail or items he had forgotten. His responses were curt, often just a few words. It hurt, but I reminded myself that healing takes time and that this distance might ultimately be necessary for both of us. 6 weeks after he left, I received a call from Gerald Weber, my attorney friend. "Alpha, I just had the most interesting conversation with your son," he said. My heart skipped. "Jackson called you, why?" "He wanted to know if you could legally charge him rent or evict him from his family home," Gerald explained. "He seemed to think he had some inherent right to live there because he grew up in the house." "What did you tell him?" I asked, though I could guess. "I explained the laws regarding property ownership and tenant rights," Gerald said. I was professional and factual. He did not like my answers. I could imagine Jackson's frustration at having his assumptions challenged by an objective third party. "Thank you for being honest with him." "Of course," Gerald replied. "But that is not why I called." The interesting part came at the end of our conversation. He asked me hypothetically, what would happen if someone lived with a relative for years and provided services like cooking and cleaning? Would they be entitled to compensation if the arrangement ended? I nearly dropped the phone. "He thinks I owe him payment for occasionally loading the dishwasher." "More than that," Gerald said. He seemed to be exploring whether he could claim he was an unpaid caretaker or household manager who deserved back pay. The audacity was so extreme, I actually laughed. That is absurd. I did all the cooking, cleaning, and household management while he lived here rent-free. "That is what I explained to him," Gerald confirmed. I also pointed out that if anyone were to calculate the market value of 3 years of housing, utilities, food, and services provided, he would likely end up owing you a substantial sum. How did he react to that? He hung up rather abruptly, Gerald admitted. "But Alpha, I think this is actually a positive development. He is wrestling with the reality of your relationship and his place in the world. That is the first step toward potential growth." After that call, another month passed without contact. I threw myself into reclaiming my life, fully joining a watercolor class. I had always been interested in reconnecting with teacher friends. I had neglected even dating a kind widower I met at a community garden event. I redecorated the guest room that had been Jackson's painting, it a soothing sage green, and setting up a reading nook by the window. It was no longer Jackson's room, but a fresh space in my home. Then on a rainy Sunday afternoon, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Jackson standing on my porch, soaking wet and looking uncharacteristically disheveled. His usual confident posture was gone, replaced by slumped shoulders and an uncertain expression. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. "Just to talk. I will not stay long." I hesitated only briefly before stepping aside. Of course. Would you like some coffee? You are drenched. That would be nice, he admitted. Thank you. We sat at the kitchen table, mugs of steaming coffee between us, the rain pattering against the windows, creating a strangely intimate atmosphere. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. I lost my place, Jackson finally said. My friend needed his spare room back for his sister. I nodded, waiting for him to continue rather than jumping in to fix things as I would have in the past. I thought it would be easy to find another situation, he went on. But it turns out housing is expensive, and roommates want you to pay your share on time, and do your own dishes. He gave a small, self-deprecating laugh that contained more awareness than I had heard from him in years. Yes, I agreed simply. Adult life involves responsibilities. He traced the rim of his mug with one finger. I have been angry with you, he admitted, blaming you for kicking me out, for embarrassing me in front of Sophia, for not understanding that I just needed more time to find my path. I know, I said. But I have also been thinking about what you said, about respect, about boundaries. He took a deep breath, and about how I introduced you to Sophia. I felt a tightening in my throat but remained silent, giving him space to continue. I cannot believe I called you the maid, he said, his voice cracking slightly. My own mother. The woman who worked 2 jobs to put me through college. Who sat up with me all night when I had that terrible flu senior year. Who baked cookies for every school event, even when you were exhausted. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I blinked them back. Why did you? I asked softly. I have been trying to understand. Jackson stared into his coffee. I wanted to impress Sophia, he said finally. Her family has money, real money, the kind with household staff and vacation homes. I thought if she knew I was living with my mother, relying on her financially, she would think less of me. So I created this fiction that the house was mine, that I was successful and independent. And I became the maid in that fiction I finished for him. Yes, he admitted, shame evident in his voice. It was easier than explaining that I was 34 and had accomplished nothing while living off my mother's generosity. I convinced myself it was just a small lie, a temporary situation until my business ideas took off. But then one lie led to another and another, until I was living in this completely false reality. What happened with Sophia? I asked, genuinely curious. She dumped me, Jackson said with a wry smile. Turns out she values honesty. Go figure. We sat in silence for a moment, the confession hanging between us. I do not expect you to forgive me right away, Jackson continued. And I do not expect to move back in. I know I violated your trust, disrespected you in your own home, and took advantage of your love for me. I just wanted you to know that I understand now, and I am sorry, truly sorry. It was the apology I had been waiting for, but I knew better than to accept words alone. What are you going to do now? I asked. I got a job, he said, a hint of pride creeping into his voice. Nothing glamorous, just assistant manager at a sporting goods store downtown, but it is steady work with benefits. I start next week. That is wonderful, I said, meaning it. A solid first step. I found a small studio apartment too, he continued. It is basically a closet with a bathroom, but it is what I can afford right now. Security deposit took nearly all my savings, but... He shrugged. Welcome to the real world, right? I smiled despite myself. The real world has been here all along, Jackson. You just chose not to see it. I know that, now, he said. And Mom, I am going to pay you back. Not all at once, but over time. For at least some of what you have done for me. You do not have to do that, I said automatically. Actually, I do, he insisted. Not because you asked for it, but because I need to. For my own self-respect. That more than anything he had said so far told me he might truly be changing. Understanding that this was not just about our relationship, but about his relationship with himself. We talked for another hour, catching up more normally than we had in years. As he prepared to leave, I found myself saying, You could come for dinner next Sunday if you want. Nothing fancy, just a meal together. I would like that, he said. And Mom, I will bring dessert, and do the dishes afterward. Over the next 6 months, Jackson and I slowly rebuilt our relationship on new, healthier terms. He came for dinner most Sundays, always bringing something to contribute and always cleaning up afterward. He asked about my watercolor class, seemed genuinely interested in my date with the gardener, which had led to several more, and started sharing honest stories about his job and apartment adventures. I visited his tiny studio apartment and brought a few household items as a housewarming gift, not taking over, just offering support. He had furnished it sparsely but neatly, and I felt a surge of pride seeing him maintaining his own space. One Sunday evening, about 8 months after our confrontation, Jackson arrived for dinner with a surprise guest, Sophia. My shock must have shown on my face. "We are just friends now," he explained quickly, "but I wanted to properly introduce you to. Sophia, this is my mother, Alpha Thompson, retired teacher, amazing cook, and the woman who finally taught me to grow up." Sophia smiled warmly and extended her hand. "It is a pleasure to meet you properly, Mrs. Thompson. Jackson has told me how much you have done for him throughout his life." "Please call me Alpha," I said, accepting her handshake, "and thank you for coming." As we sat down to dinner, I looked around the table at my adult son, who was finally acting like one, at the young woman who had inadvertently catalyzed our family reckoning, and at myself, a woman who had found the courage to demand respect after years of accepting less. The journey had been painful, but necessary. Later, after they had left, I sat on my porch swing in the gentle evening breeze, reflecting on everything that had happened. I had learned that sometimes the hardest part of loving someone is setting firm boundaries. That respect cannot be assumed even from family. That standing up for yourself is not selfish, but an act of self-love that ultimately benefits everyone involved. My house felt completely mine again, but I no longer felt alone in it. Instead, I felt surrounded by the confidence that comes from knowing your own worth and requiring others to acknowledge it too. Sometimes people need to lose something to understand its value. Jackson had needed to lose his place in my home to appreciate what it meant to have one of his own. And I had needed to risk losing my relationship with my son to reclaim my dignity and self-respect. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with someone you love? How did you find the courage to stand up for yourself when it mattered most? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that setting boundaries is an act of love, both for yourself and for those who need to grow. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the greatest gift we can give our loved ones is the opportunity to stand on their own 2 feet.